Hey guys, tonight we're tiptoeing into the least warlike version of Olympus you've ever imagined. There's no bronze armor glinting in sunlight, no battle cries echoing across endless plains, just a stuffy mountaintop conference room, a couple of beanbag chairs someone accidentally summoned from the future, and a large stone sign outside reading, "Mandatory Group Therapy for Divine Figures, Experiencing Emotional Dysregulation." And guess who's already fuming before the incense even lights? That's right, Ares, god of war, blood, chaos, and apparently suppressed inner turmoil. You're not here to fight, you're just observing. But it's hard not to notice how even the clouds above Mount Olympus seem to shift nervously as the gods shuffle in one by one. Draped in satin togas and emotional baggage, there's Dionysus, carrying a goblet larger than his own head. Athena, radiating calm menace. Apollo's busy adjusting his hair in a polished shield. And in the corner, arms crossed so tight, his muscles threaten to tear the fabric of his reality. Is Ares grumbling something about how real men don't cry? They conquer. You probably won't survive this therapy session emotionally intact, but at least you'll be entertained. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop your location and what time it is for you down in the comments. I love seeing where and when you all tune in. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The room is surprisingly cozy, in that we hired a consultant from Athens kind of way. Warm tapestries line the walls, each depicting vaguely therapeutic scenes like Zeus pretending to listen, or Aphrodite journaling. The seating is arranged in a circle, of course, and in the center, a single talking scepter lies on a velvet cushion. Whoever holds it speaks. It's the first hour of Olympus's emotional renewal initiative, and you've somehow been volunteered to sit in, not as a god, but as neutral energy. Don't worry, they've done this before. Once, it ended in a lightning storm and 6 unplanned pregnancies, but that's not the point. The therapist, an unusually serene nymph named Sibyl, begins with a low voice and a tone so soothing it could sedate a hydra. "We're not here to judge," she says. "We're here to share." Cue immediate discomfort. Eris shifts in his chair. "Can we not do the sharing thing?" Sibyl smiles patiently. "Just breathe into that resistance, lady. The only thing I breathe into is a war horn." Dionysus snorts, wine already dripping from his beard. "Oh, someone's armor is chafing." "Shut up, grape boy." Mainstream historical fact time. The ancient Greeks actually saw Ares as kind of embarrassing. Unlike other gods like Athena, who was strategic and graceful, Ares was a bit of a loose cannon, respected, yes, but often seen as impulsive, destructive, and even disliked by the other Olympians. Fringe fact. There was a real shrine to Ares in the middle of a legal district in Athens, not a battlefield, not a colosseum, a legal zone. Some believe it was symbolic, linking war to justice. Others think someone just read the divine zoning laws wrong. Let's do introductions. Sibyl continues. "Apollo beams. I'm Apollo, god of music, light, and rational discourse." Athena nods. "Wisdom, strategy, and limited patience for fragile egos." Dionysus raises his goblet lazily. "Part-time vine daddy, full-time vibe curator." Eris. Comes the gruff growl. "War. Just war." Silence. You can hear a pigeon cough outside. Sibyl gently pushes a scroll toward him. "Can you add how you're feeling today? Like, I want to dropkick this circle into Tartarus." She jots something down on a papyrus pad. "Thank you for your honesty." Apollo raises a hand. "Can we reflect on that? Because Ares clearly feels unseen, and I will punch your soul out of your body." There's a moment, just a flicker, where you catch it. Not rage, not bravado, but tiredness. Ares' shoulders drop just a little. His gaze flicks toward the stone floor. You wonder if this war god, all bristle and brawn, might just be exhausted. Historians still argue whether Ares was meant to represent necessary aggression or simply the horrors of chaotic battle. Some versions of Greek myth depict him as a cautionary tale, a god who charges into conflict without thinking, often losing or needing rescue, and never quite grasping the bigger picture. Sibyl claps her hands softly. "Let's breathe in. 4 counts. Aries growls and breathe out. Aries sighs through gritted teeth like a boulder being wheeled up a hill. Outside, a goat screams. Inside, therapy continues. You sit back and let the scented oils do their thing. There's a faint aroma of olive branches and possibly emotional repressed rage. The couch creaks ominously as Aries crosses his arms again. The gods are just getting started, and so are you. The room now smells vaguely of fig incense and passive aggression. You're not sure if it's the scented oil or the divine tension thick enough to butter a barley loaf. But before Aries can bolt from his stool, Dionysus claims the talking scepter with an exaggerated flourish and a dramatic sigh that suggests he's been through so much already. Well, he begins, swirling wine in his cup like a therapist with a minor god complex. I suppose I should model vulnerability, as usual. Aries rolls his eyes so hard it practically tilts the Earth's axis. Dionysus crosses one leg over the other, toga billowing like a theater curtain. Lately, I've been feeling, boxed in. My vines are withering. My parties feel more like funerals. I tried to host a masquerade, and someone brought charcuterie made of feelings. That was me, Athena says flatly. I know, darling, and it ruined the vibe. The therapist, Sibyl, leans in encouragingly. And what do you want to feel? Unbothered. Dionysus breathes, closing his eyes, effervescent, ideally barefoot in a field of narcissuses who can't find me. There's a moment of stillness, where even Aries doesn't know whether to grunt or snort. You know, Apollo says from across the circle, you could try sobriety. Dionysus opens one eye, and you could try not being a solar-themed narcissist. But here we are, fringe tidbit time. While Dionysus is typically known as the god of wine and theater, some ancient Greek sects associated him with divine madness, not just the fun kind, but the terrifying, mask-slipping kind. He was said to induce frenzy in his followers, a reminder that joy without limits often turns into chaos. Aries audibly exhales. Is this what therapy is? Talking about wine picnics and dead vibes, can we move on? Sibyl nods gently. It's valid to feel resistant, but listening is part of healing, right? Because I need to heal. Aries does air quotes, which look more like air claws with his calloused fingers. I stab things. I don't journal them. Dionysus grins slyly. You've never even tried journaling. You'd be surprised what a feather quill and 3 unresolved traumas can do. The scepter is passed to Aries, or rather, it's levitated and dropped into his lap by Athena, who smirks slightly. Fine, he grunts. You want a feeling? I'm bored. Bored and surrounded by gods who confuse talking about themselves with doing something useful. He doesn't look at anyone as he speaks, especially not Sibyl. I get summoned to battles I don't care about, painted on shields like a trophy. And half the time, they only remember me when they need a scapegoat for bad strategy. A moment of honesty, a sliver of something real. You could elaborate on that. Sibyl encourages. No, he snaps. I said the thing. Next, he hurls the scepter across the circle. It bounces lightly against a plush pillow, embroidered with feeling is strength. Apollo picks it up, inspecting the embroidery like it might explode. Mainstream historical fact. In Homer's Iliad, Ares is one of the few gods who gets wounded in battle by a mortal. Diomedes, with the help of Athena, actually stabs Ares with a spear, something rarely seen in other mythologies. It made Ares seem not only vulnerable, but sometimes downright unlucky. And yet, there's a kind of poetry to that. You watch Ares clench and unclench his fists, his jaw tight enough to crack obsidian. He doesn't want to be vulnerable, not because he can't, because he knows what it leads to. Mockery, dismissal, or worse, indifference. Historians still argue whether Ares represented chaotic masculine rage or whether he was a tragic figure, embodying how societies glorify war while secretly hating those who wage it. Sibyl gestures toward the group. Let's try something together. Everyone share one adjective to describe Ares. Apollo clears his throat. Impulsive. Athena adds, redundant. Dionysus grins. Sweaty. Hephaestus mutters from the corner. Loud. Aphrodite, who has just walked in fashionably late, offers. Intense. With a very complicated smile. Ares doesn't flinch, doesn't snarl. He just looks at you, like maybe you'd have said something else. Something less pointed, like overwork or uninvited. He shrugs. I am what the world made me. Sybil nods slowly. And what do you make of yourself? The pause is long. You hear a breeze shift through an open window. Somewhere, a lyre string snaps without reason. I'm not sure. Ares finally admits, voice barely above a whisper. No one ever asked. And then, like it never happened, he stands up, grabs a goblet of pomegranate juice, and drains it in one go. I'm done. He grunts, storming out the chamber doors. Don't worry, Dionysus says softly, twirling his scepter. He'll be back. You don't know how he knows, but he's right. He's back. Not with fanfare, not with thunder, just a door creaking open on slightly misaligned divine hinges, and the unmistakable weight of someone who walks like he's permanently disappointed in the ground. Ares re-enters the therapy room with his arms full, holding what appears to be a bronze training spear and a fruit basket. No one asks. No one dares. He sits, not gracefully, more like a boulder deciding to participate in a picnic. Sybil, still infinitely patient, greets him with a warm nod. Glad you returned. Didn't say I was staying, Ares mutters, plopping the fruit basket in front of him. Grapes roll out like little guilt offerings. I just forgot my spear. Athena cocks a brow. That you're now holding. Don't start. But Sybil, ever the brave nymph, senses an opening. Why don't we try grounding through a physical object? Let's talk about the spear. What does it mean to you? Ares scoffs. It's a spear. Sybil waits. He shifts in his seat. Fine. It's focus, control. When I'm holding it, I'm not losing it. Not like he cuts off. Dionysus, lounging in an aggressively relaxed pose, murmurs. Not like when you smashed that marble statue of yourself last week. I told you that was a training accident, right? You were training the statue to feel fear. Ares huffs, but the muscles in his shoulders don't rise so high this time. He rotates the spear slowly in his hand. You watch the tip glint in the firelight, dulled, but still sharp like Ares himself. Maybe. Sybil's voice stays low. Would you say you're always in battle mode? Ares squints. What other mode is there? Apollo clears his throat. Spa day. Dionysus lifts his goblet. Decadent brunch. Hephaestus grumbles from the back. Sleep. I don't sleep. Ares snaps. Not like you people. I get called into dreams, nightmares. I'm invoked with blood and screaming. Do you know what that does to a person? He doesn't mean to say it like that, but he does. And the room quiets. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek soldiers often swore oaths to Ares before battle, calling upon him to either guide their strikes or spare their families. He wasn't just the god of violence. He was the middleman between fear and glory, the sacred permission slip to commit acts men later wept over. Ares leans forward now, elbows on his knees, fingers still gripping the spear too tightly. You know what the worst part is? He mutters. After a war ends, no one thanks me. They thank Nike for victory, Athena for wisdom, Apollo for light. I'm the guy who shows up, breaks everything, then gets blamed for the smoke. Hephaestus grunts. Sounds familiar. You don't start the wars, Athena points out, perhaps too gently. No, Ares agrees, but I finish them. And that's the part people hate. Sybil watches him with those unreadable eyes that therapists somehow train for. What if you weren't just the end of the story? He freezes. It's as if the concept never occurred to him. Like asking a blade if it's ever wanted to be a pen. Fringe myth moment. In one obscure Orphic fragment, Ares is briefly described not just as a destroyer, but as a necessary purifier. His presence was brought to cleanse through fire and conflict, resetting balance when it had decayed. Scholars barely reference it, but it's there, hinting at a version of him that wasn't merely chaos, but catalyst. Ares stands again. He walks to the tapestry wall, brushing one aside to reveal a hidden alcove. Inside, a broken helmet, jagged along the rim. First time I lost, he murmurs. Didn't even see the spear. Some mortal, lucky shot. My cheek split open. I bled like anyone else. He turned slightly toward the group, not quite meeting their eyes, and I liked it. Everyone stiffens. Even Dionysus blinks. Not because it hurt, Ares clarifies, but because it reminded me I exist. That I'm not some idea of war. I'm me. And I get tired. There it is, the first almost breakthrough. Like sunlight leaking into a long-locked room. Historians still argue whether Ares was designed as a cautionary archetype or as an embodiment of necessary destruction. something to be feared, yet quietly worshipped. In later Roman myth, his counterpart Mars was seen as more honorable, more strategic. But the Greek version, he was a walking trigger warning. Ares places the broken helmet gently on the table. It wobbles, then stills. You realize everyone's watching him now. Not warily, not mockingly, just watching. Dionysus whispers, "Do you want a hug?" Ares glares. "I'll take that as a soon." The Dionysus says. Ares returns to his seat. He doesn't let go of the spear, but he doesn't hold it like a weapon anymore. You close your eyes for a moment, feeling the warmth of the room, the hum of a storm retreating in the distance. The war god, it seems, has taken his first real breath in centuries. And you're just trying not to cry in front of literal immortals. It starts with a sigh. Not the kind you'd expect from a battlefield, more like the long exhale of someone about to lose their last ounce of patience in a divine family reunion. Athena leans forward, her voice crisp as a snapped scroll. If we're being honest, it's not entirely Ares' fault. You glance over, Ares doesn't react. He's back to staring at the floor like it owes him money. Apollo, polishing his already polished lyre, doesn't miss a beat. "Oh no, please, go on. Tell us how we're the problem." Athena doesn't flinch. "We've all let him be one thing for too long." Violent, Hephaestus grumbles. "Explosive, anti-helmet. A symbol," she says flatly, "of what we're afraid to admit. Sometimes we like when someone else carries the blame." The room tightens. Even Dionysus sets down his goblet. Ares finally speaks, voice low. "So now I'm the group scapegoat." Athena shrugs. "No, just the loudest wound. You're not entirely sure what that means, but it hits like a cracked amphora. The kind that leaks emotions instead of olive oil." Sibyl, the therapist, adjusts a candle on the low table. "Let's unpack that." The gods visibly recoil at the phrase. Fringe fact. Ancient Greek theater, especially tragedy, was considered a form of catharsis, a way for citizens to release inner tension through shared emotion. Scholars now believe mythic characters like Ares functioned similarly, as avatars for feelings. Polite society didn't know how to process. You weren't supposed to like him. You were supposed to need him to feel something safely. Apollo crosses his arms, shifting in his silver-trimmed seat. "Well, he never tries to be liked." Ares scoffs. "Is this therapy or a popularity contest?" "Could be both." Dionysus says, suddenly wearing a crown made of laurel leaves and poor impulse control. Apollo, who has had enough citrus for one conversation, leans in. "I'm just saying, it's not our fault if you storm into every scene with a spear and no subtlety." "You mean like when you set fire to that village by accident during your sun chariot joyride?" Ares growls. "That was a malfunction. You were singing. That was ritualistic." Sibyl lifts a hand. "Let's remember, we're here to speak from the I perspective." Athena clears her throat. "I feel that you both could benefit from silence." Dionysus claps softly. Group roast. I love this part. Mainstream historical fact. The Greeks did not consider their gods morally perfect. Quite the opposite. They were exaggerated, flawed, erratic. Divine soap opera characters whose infighting and bad decisions explained the chaos of life. Ares was their walking, shouting, occasionally sulking embodiment of unchecked reaction. A live-action caution sign. Let's try this instead, Sibyl says gently. Imagine you weren't gods, just siblings. The silence is seismic. Apollo laughs first. Please, I'd have reported Ares to Mount Olympus Child Services by the time we were 3. Ares grunts. And I'd have put you in a headlock before you ever hit puberty. You did. Apollo snaps 4 times. Athena closes her eyes. I remember. There was blood and very creative cursing. Hephaestus leans back, steepling his soot-covered fingers. I would have moved out. I did move out, Aphrodite says from the corner. Flipping a golden curl, no one ever noticed. Sibyl lets it unfold. You admire her restraint. You're just trying not to laugh snort in the presence of actual immortals. Then, like fog creeping in at twilight, something shifts. The jokes soften. The memories, real or reconstructed through divine stubbornness, start to reveal something oddly human. Ares taps the edge of his spear against the floor, not out of anger this time, but rhythm. I hated being the youngest, not because of the teasing, because by the time I got here, you all had roles. Athena the strategist, Apollo the golden child. Dionysus, the fun one. I got stuck with the rage. Athena opens one eye. I was born out of a skull. Ares, I didn't get a baby blanket either. Yeah, he mutters. But they liked you. And there it is. Sibyl doesn't speak. She just lets the moment hang like incense. Historians still argue whether the relationships between Greek gods were meant to reflect actual family dynamics or serve as metaphors for societal balance. But there's no denying that the tensions between Ares and his siblings especially. Athena often mirrored debates about control versus chaos, logic versus impulse, public image versus raw truth. Do you want to be liked? Ares, Dionysus asks softly. Ares looks up, not defensive, not smirking, just tired. I want to be needed for something real. Dionysus nods, slow and theatrical, like he's heard this before in 10,000 different taverns. That part's relatable. You feel it in your chest. 2. That weight, that ache for relevance beyond utility. It's not just divine, it's deeply, annoyingly mortal. The fire crackles. The room feels warmer, somehow, like the gods are starting to glow from something other than celestial vanity. Ares sets down the spear, not across his lap, not upright like a sentinel, just gently on the floor beside him. You could swear the mountain exhales. So, Sibyl says gently, folding her hands like someone about to pry open a treasure chest full of unresolved trauma. Let's talk about your childhood. Ares blinks. Like she's just asked him to knit a sweater. I didn't have one. He replies flatly, that's not true. Athena interjects, twirling a strand of her hair. You were famously the loudest baby in Olympus. There was a poem about it. Something about your scream-curdling nectar. Fake news. Ares mutters, crossing his arms. I was forged in war. Dionysus leans forward, a wicked smile playing on his lips. Oh no, don't do that. We all had to sit through your baby tantrums. Remember when Hera had to carry you in a sling made of wolf pelts because you refused the golden one? I had sensory issues. You can't help but stifle a laugh, which earns you a quick, sidelong glare from Ares. Not angry, just surprised that someone like you is still here. Let's explore that, Sibyl says calmly. The sling. Your mother. Ares groans like the floor beneath him is personally responsible. Here we go. Mainstream historical fact. Ares was the son of Zeus and Hera, but he was never as celebrated as some of their other children. He lacked the strategic brilliance of Athena, the charm of Hermes, or even the romantic flair of Apollo. In fact, Ares was often depicted as Zeus's least favorite child, loud, uncontrollable, and bad for Olympus' public image. Mom was complicated. Ares mutters. She was strong, fierce, cold as obsidian in winter. I thought she'd be proud of me when I brought back the head of a giant boar at age 7. You brought it into the kitchen. Hephaestus mutters. It was a gift. Sibyl gently pushes again. And how did Hera react? Ares stares into the fire. She said, you've stained the floor. Oof. The room falls quiet. Even Dionysus's grapes seem to wilt in sympathy. Parents aren't always what we need them to be, Sibyl says softly. Fringe tidbit. There's a barely known fragment from a lost play attributed to Euripides that describes Ares as being locked in a silver cradle for 3 years by 2 giants who wanted to control war. Some scholars believe this was symbolic of how the ancient world tried to contain raw violence, even from childhood, a poetic imprisonment of impulse before it could fully form. I wasn't allowed in the hall of debate. Ares mutters, too loud. I wasn't invited to Apollo's harp recitals. Too aggressive. I wasn't even allowed to light the ceremonial flame at the solstice festival because someone thought I'd turn it into a signal fire for invasion. That was a reasonable concern, Athena says under her breath. Ares turns to her. You know what it felt like? Watching you win trophies for strategy while I got called a brute for doing the thing you designed. Her lips press together, but she doesn't argue. You were always the plan. Ares says, I was just the wrecking ball. Historians still argue whether Athena and Ares were ever meant to be true opposites or 2 sides of the same philosophy. Some say they represent different aspects of warfare. Athena, the cold tactician. Ares, the visceral heat. Others believe they were never meant to coexist, but were forced to by myth makers who needed both ideals to explain human nature. I don't think you're just a wrecking ball, Athena says at last. Ares raises a brow. She sighs. I think you're the scream before the silence. The moment the heart races, you are war, but not just destruction. You're the chaos that makes people notice what peace actually feels like. A pause. Then Dionysus snorts. That was the most poetic thing I've heard since I blacked out in a poetry contest and woke up with laurels stapled to my thighs. Apollo claps once. Lightly, Athena. That was almost tender. Don't get used to it, she mutters, hiding a smirk behind her goblet. Ares doesn't reply, but he doesn't look away either. Sybil smiles faintly. Let's try an exercise. Each of you say one thing you remember from Ares' childhood. Something real. Apollo volunteers first. You once tried to ride Pegasus while wearing a full breastplate. It was majestic. Dionysus adds, until you slipped off and face planted into a pile of sacred figs. I bit my tongue. Ares grumbles. Bled for a week. First time I saw you not talk for a whole day, Athena says with a grin. Hephaestus leans forward. You once came to my forge with a drawing. It was a new kind of spear. You asked if we could make it together. Ares blinks. I didn't know you remembered that. I do. Hephaestus says, quieter now. It was the first time I saw you build something. Aphrodite finally chimes in, voice low. I remember when you cried. The room stills. You were 4, she continues. You stepped on a scorpion by accident. And you cried so hard you flooded my garden. Ares stares at her. I thought I hallucinated that. She just nods. And for a moment, the gods are quiet. Not because they're bored or sulking, but because there's something sacred about remembering someone when they forgot how to remember themselves. You look at Ares now. He doesn't look softer, but he does look a little less alone. It begins, as these things often do, with a sigh and a flash of uninvited memory. I don't like to talk about Troy, Ares says suddenly. No one's asked yet, but the way he says it like a drunk uncle preemptively denying responsibility tells you everything. We're going there anyway. You shift in your seat. The fire snaps somewhere outside. Thunder growls like Zeus clearing his throat. Troy, Dionysus mutters, slouching dramatically into a velvet beanbag. The divine group project that broke us all. Apollo chuckles bitterly. 10 years of curses, omens, and bad choices, and Ares trying to turn every minor skirmish into a performance art piece. I was summoned, Ares growls, by blood oath. You answered like it was open mic night, but there's no venom in the exchange. Not anymore. Not tonight. Sybil lifts her gaze from her notes, voice soft. Tell us what that war meant to you. Ares looks up slowly. The firelight dances along his jaw, casting shadows that seem to flicker with old, unfinished stories. It meant noise, he says. Constant noise. Clashing swords. Dying breath. The scream of 1,000 regrets. And every time I showed up, they looked at me like I enjoyed it. Mainstream historical fact. In many ancient Greek depictions, Ares appears on the battlefield not as a rescuer or leader, but as a kind of supernatural chaos engine. Soldiers feared invoking him too strongly, lest they attract his gaze and find themselves locked in a blood frenzy. Even among the gods, he was considered reckless, powerful, but unpredictable. You did enjoy it, Apollo says. Ares doesn't deny it. Sometimes, not the dying, not the pain, but the clarity. The moment before a sword hits you, when nothing exists but movement and breath and fate, that part. I still dream about it. You mean nightmares, Athena says. He shrugs. What's the difference? Sybil leans forward. Do you still feel guilt? It takes him a moment. You see it not in his words, but in the way his fingers twitch, like they're gripping a spear that isn't there. I feel, he trails off. I feel that none of it mattered. 10 years, thousands of lives, and for what? A city burned. A woman stolen, and me painted in every version of the story like I was a rabid dog off the leash. A pause. I wasn't rabid, he adds. I was loyal. Fringe myth. In some obscure regional tellings, Ares tried to stop certain battles from escalating at Troy, not out of mercy, but strategy. These tales claim he warned generals to retreat when victory turned hollow. Of course, those stories rarely made it into mainstream myth. No one wants their god of war handing out exit strategies. Athena crosses her arms. You weren't the only one who lost things. I know that. Eris snaps. But I was the one no one mourned. The words hang heavy in the firelight, like ash that refuses to fall. I stood on the walls of Troy, he says quietly, and I felt every soul leave that place. I didn't count victories. I counted ghosts. No one dares interrupt. Not even Dionysus. I tried to save one boy. Ares continues, almost to himself. A young soldier, didn't even shave yet, ran back into the fire for his brother. I pulled him out. He died anyway. Infection. 3 days later, he finally meets Sibyl's eyes. What do you call a god who couldn't save one mortal? She doesn't answer, because maybe there isn't one. Historians still argue whether Ares was ever truly worshipped with the same devotion as other gods. His temples were fewer, his altars often temporary. Some suggest he was meant to be feared, not loved, a necessary figure in a world that didn't know what to do with its own thirst for violence. I kept his helmet. Ares says, it's in my vault. Polished it once, then stopped. The blood wouldn't come off. The room is so still you can hear Dionysus breathing. It sounds like guilt fermented into memory. Athena breaks the silence with the gentlest thing you've ever heard her say. What was his name? Ares closes his eyes. Thalos, he says, son of no one important, and the bravest soldier I ever met. And for once, no one questions the story. Dionysus raises his goblet and tips a drop of wine onto the floor. To Thalos, Hephaestus echoes him. To Thalos, even Apollo, ever aloof, nods. To the ones we remember when we shouldn't. Sibyl lets the moment settle, then asks the question Ares has been avoiding for centuries. What do you want people to remember about you? He thinks you can see the war raging behind his eyes. Battles long done, regrets still bleeding. That I didn't start every fire. He says, some of them I just refuse to walk away from. And then he exhales, shoulders sinking like towers finally allowed to crumble. You didn't expect to feel this much in a room full of immortals. But somehow, tonight, they all feel deeply, painfully human. The silence after Ares' confession is not empty, it's weighted. Like the stillness of a battlefield after the dust settles, when even the crows seem hesitant to speak. And then Hera walks in. She does not knock. She does not glide. She enters, in the way only queens and tidal waves do. Her sandals click sharply against the marble floor. She wears 17 bangles and a facial expression that could freeze molten gold. Am I late? She asks, knowing full well she is. Everyone sits up straighter. Even Dionysus tries to look less windswept. Ares stares at her like a startled animal. Not fearful, never fearful, but like a volcano watching another volcano walk into the room. Sibyl offers a careful nod. Welcome, Hera. We're just exploring formative experiences. Oh, Hera says dryly, then I'm precisely on time. She sits next to Athena, who shifts only slightly, just enough not to be touching. Hera, of course, notices. She notices everything. Without waiting for an invitation, she takes the talking scepter and points it directly at Ares. Well, are you going to tell them how I ruined you? The entire circle stiffens. Even the fire seems to dim. Ares doesn't look at her. I didn't say that. But you meant it, she says, smiling with too many teeth. Mainstream historical fact. In ancient myth, Hera is the goddess of marriage, family, and childbirth, but also vengeance, control, and divine politics. She's one of the most complex figures in the Greek pantheon, often portrayed as both protector and tyrant. With Ares, she is mother and something else. Sibyl clears her throat. We're focusing on emotional insight, not accusation. Oh, I have insight. Hera purrs. Ares was born during a siege. Did he tell you that? My contraction started as arrows hit the temple walls. He came into this world screaming like he was leading the charge. Ares' jaw tightens. That's not how I remember it. That's because you were 2 minutes old. Fringe tidbit. Some alternative myths claim Hera bore Ares alone without Zeus's involvement out of spite, ambition, or divine experimentation. If true, it could explain why their relationship is so uniquely fraught. She didn't want a child. She wanted a weapon that could walk. I taught you discipline. Hera says, still speaking to the room but watching Ares. You were a wild flame. I tried to give you form. You gave me orders, he replies, and then punished me for following them too well. Athena shifts. Apollo stares at the floor. Dionysus mouths, uh-oh. Hephaestus picks at the charred edge of his robe like it's suddenly fascinating. You wanted me to be a god of fear, Eris says slowly, but you forgot to teach me how to be a person. Hera's face flickers. Just a second. Then the marble mask returns. I gave you everything Olympus could offer. No, he corrects. You gave me enemies. The words hit harder than thunder. You feel them in your ribs. Historians still argue whether Ares and Hera were meant to reflect an ideal or a warning. Some scholars suggest their dynamic represents an allegory of militarized loyalty, parental love twisted into performance pressure. Others argue that Ares was Hera's attempt at control incarnate, raw power raised in a cage. Sybil keeps her voice gentle. Hera, do you feel you were afraid for him? Hera's expression cracks for the first time. I was afraid of him, she says. The admission hangs in the air like incense smoke, unexpected and strangely fragrant. He cried in his sleep as a child. Hera continues, called out for victories he hadn't earned yet. Fought invisible enemies. Once shattered a marble crib in a dream. I thought maybe if I taught him fear, he'd stop making me feel it. Ares looks at her, eyes dark but not angry now. Then you could have just held me. Silence. Real. Crushing. Absolute silence. Dionysus reaches for a goblet that isn't there. Athena blinks 3 times and seems to forget how to breathe. Sybil, miracle worker that she is, doesn't speak. She lets the truth stand. Ares speaks again, quieter. I didn't want to be your sword. I wanted to be your son. That's it. That's the center of it all. The axis of this god's fury. You suddenly realize Ares hasn't picked up his spear in nearly an hour. Hera finally lets her shoulders drop. I didn't know how, she whispers. I thought gods weren't supposed to do that. Me neither, he replies. And for one trembling moment, mother and son sit in the same grief. It doesn't fix anything, but it names it. And sometimes that's more sacred than resolution. The fire flares up, golden and wide. The room is warmer again. Ares looks over at Sybil. Do I have to say I forgive her? No, she says. You only have to mean it, eventually. He nods once. That's enough. And Hera, of all people, looks like she might cry. But she doesn't, because gods are stubborn. And also Mascara, the next morning. They arrive early. Ares is already in the room, pacing in slow, deliberate circles, like a warhorse forced to graze in a meditation garden. The spear is nowhere in sight. Instead, he's holding a lump of clay. It's shaped vaguely like a duck, or a helmet, or something in between. You don't ask. He doesn't look up when the others filter in, one by one, pretending they aren't curious about what he's doing. Apollo hums something tuneless. Athena reads a scroll upside down. Dionysus wears a toga made entirely of fig leaves. The vibe is, as usual, deeply unhinged. Hephaestus arrives last, leaning heavily on his cane. Today's agenda, Sybil had hinted, is constructive conflict resolution. The gods interpreted this loosely. Hephaestus interpreted it as a chance to finally talk. Let's begin, Sybil says, too cheerfully for what's coming. Ares doesn't sit. Hephaestus clears his throat. You broke my forge bellows. Again, Ares shrugs. They were squeaky. They were centuries old, and they squeaked like judgmental harpies. The tension, somehow, is both ancient and fresh. Like bread made from emotional resentment. Mainstream, historical fact. Hephaestus and Ares were never close. In myth, they often sit on opposite ends of conflict. Hephaestus, god of crafting and invention, meticulous and slow. Ares, god of war, blunt force and reaction. To complicate matters, there's Aphrodite, who is married to Hephaestus, but often described as the lover of Ares. Dionysus leans over and stage whispers, "This is why I only date mortals." Less divine fallout. No one asked, Athena says without looking up. Still true. Dionysus hums, "I didn't come to fight." Hephaestus says suddenly, looking directly at Ares, "I came because I realized something." Go on, Sybil prompts. Hephaestus's voice is slower than usual. "Every time I build something to last, you're the first to break it." Ares tilts his head. Is that a compliment? It's a pattern. Hephaestus replies, "But I think maybe you don't do it to destroy. Maybe you do it to see if it holds." That catches Ares off guard. You see it in the way his mouth stops forming a sarcastic comeback halfway through. Say that again, he mutters. You break things, Hephaestus says gently. Because you don't trust anything to stay. Ares blinks like he's been hit in the chest with a pillow full of bricks. Sybil watches him carefully. Does that resonate? Ares snorts. What is this? Pottery class. Yes, Sybil says, not missing a beat. Which is why today's session includes surprise sculpting your defenses. The clay in Ares's Jishi's hand suddenly makes sense. He stares down at it like it betrayed him. This wasn't supposed to be symbolic. He grumbles. Nothing ever is until it is. Apollo murmurs like someone who read one too many philosophical scrolls in college. Fringe tidbit. In a little-known vase painting now lost to time, there's an image of Ares sitting beside Hephaestus in a forge helping him, not destroying. Some scholars think this was a lost myth. Others argue it was a hopeful reinterpretation, a world where destruction and creation work together instead of tearing each other apart. I break things because I'm afraid they'll betray me first, Ares mutters, shaping the clay with his thumb. Like what? Sybil asks. Like armor that cracks? Or gods that leave? Or love that lies? His fingers still. Athena closes her scroll. Aphrodite, who has been unnaturally quiet, finally speaks. I never lied, she says softly. He doesn't look at her. You never told the truth either, he replies. Sybil interjects carefully. We're not focusing on romantic wounds today. Ares grins bitterly. You might want to cancel the rest of the week. Then, the room chuckles, but the air remains tight. Hephaestus steps forward. You don't owe me forgiveness. Ares looks up. I just want you to stop assuming I hate you. Hephaestus continues. I hated what you meant. To her, to Olympus, to the stories they told, but not you. You're just... He trails off. Just what? Ares says. A lonely hammer. Hephaestus says, swinging at the world, hoping to hear it ring true. You're not entirely sure what that means. But it lands, somewhere deep, somewhere old. Historians still debate whether Ares and Hephaestus ever reconciled. There's no canonical myth that shows them healing. But in Roman reinterpretations, Mars and Vulcan occasionally appear side by side, suggesting that even the fire and the sword, if left long enough in the same forge, could eventually craft something new. I didn't know how to talk to you, Ares says, almost whispering. You build things. I break things. I thought that was all there was. Hephaestus gives a rare, crooked smile. Sometimes, you have to shatter the mold before you understand the clay. Dionysus claps lightly. Is this a therapy session or a poetry slam? Athena glares. Let them finish. Ares stands up. He walks across the circle, holds out the lumpy helmet. Duck of clay. For you, he says to Hephaestus. It's abstract. Hephaestus takes it, cradling it like it might detonate. Thank you, he says simply, and in that weird, quiet, Olympian way. Something mends. Not fully, not loudly, but enough. The next hour is suspiciously quiet. No scepter throwing. No emotional outbursts. Not even a sarcastic prophecy from Apollo, who's currently drawing a suspiciously lifelike cartoon of Ares on the back of a scroll labeled Conflict Processing, step by step. And then it happens. A nymph enters nervous, trembling, holding a satin-wrapped bundle like it's glowing. You don't recognize her, but Ares does. She crosses the room in a straight line, eyes on the ground, and kneels before the war god like someone delivering a love letter to a thunderstorm. It's from her, she whispers. The moment freezes. Everyone knows who her is. Aphrodite doesn't move, but the air around her does tighter, warmer, like blush rising into invisible skin. Ares takes the bundle, slowly, reluctantly. His hands are steady, but his breathing isn't. He unties the fabric with fingers that look too large for something so delicate. Inside, a scroll, pale rose parchment, sealed with the wax imprint of a dove pierced by a sword. Because of course, it is. Dionysus whistles. Wow. Subtle. Shut up. Athena hisses. Ares doesn't open it immediately. He just holds it, like it might combust or sing. Then, after a beat, he unrolls it. You expect him to read aloud, but he doesn't. He reads silently, jaw clenched, eyes moving slowly, then faster, then slowly again. When he's done, he doesn't speak. He folds the scroll carefully, too carefully, like something that might break. Then he finally looks at Aphrodite. You couldn't say any of this before. She meets his gaze, unblinking. Would you have listened? Mainstream historical fact. Ares and Aphrodite's affair is one of the oldest and most widely depicted in ancient art. She was married to Hephaestus, yes, but lovers with Ares. Their relationship symbolized the tension between desire and destruction. Love at its most combustible. No, Ares admits, I would have thought it was a trick. Or pity, it wasn't. Then what was it? He asks, quieter now. Fringe myth. In one obscure tradition from Cyprus, Aphrodite did not fall in love with Ares because of his power, but because he was the only god who didn't expect her to be gentle, who loved her when she was fierce, mortal, ugly with grief. It's a story that appears only once, on a piece of cracked pottery now held in a forgotten museum. But it lingers. I loved you, Aphrodite says, the way you loved war. Violently, completely, destructively, and without a plan. He laughs. Once. It sounds like a punchline to a joke that didn't land. You made me soft, he says. You made me sharp. She counters, and now everyone is watching, not like spectators, like survivors of a battle no one admitted they were part of. Cybele, with surgical precision, speaks, do you think love can survive when it isn't safe? Ares and Aphrodite don't answer, because they know it didn't, and still, it mattered. I hated you when you left. Ares says, but I hated myself more for making you want to. Aphrodite tilts her head. You didn't make me leave. I left because I couldn't keep pretending I was strong enough to stay. Athena whispers something to Apollo, who nods slowly. Even gods, it seems, struggle to witness two people trying to shut a wound that never healed properly. Ares steps forward and places the scroll in the center of the circle. For the record, he says, I still think about the time we ran away to that mortal island, the fishing village. The way you laughed when we ruined their net because we thought it was a hammock. Aphrodite smiles, not smugly, not seductively, just fondly. You tried to fight a goat for dominance. She says, I let it win. You absolutely did not. Historians still argue whether Aphrodite and Ares were ever meant to be together. Some say their relationship was a moral lesson, a warning against passion without reason. Others believe they were divine inevitabilities, fire and wind, destined to create storms. Cybele nods slowly. Love doesn't have to end in permanence to matter. Ares glances at her. Was that in a scroll, or are you making these up as we go? A little of both, she replies. You don't realize you're holding your breath until Ares walks back to his seat, hands finally empty. He doesn't look lighter, exactly, but he's no longer carrying something unspoken. Aphrodite stays where she is. Not close, not far, just enough. And that's probably the best they've ever done. You're starting to think this therapy group is cursed with momentum, because just as the emotional dust from Aphrodite's scroll starts to settle when you think maybe everyone can breathe again, Cybele stands, claps once, and says, great, let's try something experiential. Please rise for the therapeutic hoplite roleplay exercise. Everyone groans in spiritual unison. What fresh Hades is this? Ares mutters, already halfway to the door. You agreed to nonverbal processing on day 1. Cybele reminds him, I agreed under duress. Apollo lifts a golden helmet from a pile that wasn't there 2 seconds ago. She's serious. There's a choreographed sequence. Not doing it. Ares growls, you get to be the losing soldier. Athena adds helpfully, he stops mid-step. You want me to lose. In a roleplay, Cybele nods with professional cheer. That's right. Today's prompt is, what happens when you are defeated but not destroyed? Dionysus laughs so hard he spills wine down both legs. This is the best day of my immortal life. Ares, somehow, does not flip a table. You suspect he's evolving. The next half hour is chaos, wearing the disguise of structure. The gods split into 2 teams. Apollo insists on singing background music. Athena coordinates a perfect tactical formation with Dionysus, inexplicably dual-wielding cheese platters as shields. Ares is placed alone in the center of a chalk circle drawn with suspicious speed by Cybele, who pulls a whistle from somewhere. On my mark, she says, you will act out a classic battle scenario. The point is not violence, it's surrender. Unacceptable. Aries mutters, mandatory. She replies, mainstream historical fact. The Greek hoplite was a heavily armored foot soldier trained not just for combat, but for cohesion. Every movement precise, every shield interlocking with another. It wasn't about personal glory. It was about holding the line together. That idea, collective discipline, ran counter to how Ares was worshipped. As chaotic, brutal, often alone. The battle begins, sort of. There's a lot of slow motion lunging. Athena faints with her imaginary spear. Apollo spins too many times and crashes into a curtain. Dionysus flops dramatically to the floor, declaring, "My grapes are wounded." And in the middle of it all stands Ares, still, silent, surrounded. Then Sybil gives the cue. Now, Ares lose. He doesn't move. "You're wounded," she prompts. "I'm immortal, emotionally wounded." He rolls his eyes. Then, in the most unconvincing slow-motion collapse you've ever seen, drops to one knee. Apollo claps. Wow, such pathos. I felt it in my harpstring. Athena lowers her blade. You're supposed to say a final line. Ares sighs. What kind of line? Something vulnerable. Sybil says. He thinks, deep breath, and then, in a gravel, soft voice, says, "I was never taught how to fall without shattering." Nobody speaks, not even Dionysus, who might actually be weeping into a fig. Fringe tidbit. A rare Spartan war hymn includes a stanza in which Ares is invoked not to win, but to return survivors from battle. This hymn has puzzled scholars. Was it a plea for restraint, or a hidden acknowledgement that war, in the end, is not about glory but about who comes home? Ares rises, dusts off the chalk from his knees, and mutters, "This is stupid." But he doesn't leave the circle. Sybil steps in gently. "What did that line mean for you?" He shrugs. "When I lose, I don't bend. I break, because no one showed you how to fall." He hesitates, then nods. You glance at Athena. She's watching him closely, not judging, just considering. Hephaestus leans on his cane. "You know, I fall all the time." "Because you trip." Dionysus offers helpfully. "No," Hephaestus says, "because I get back up." Ares looks at him. "I don't know how to do that," he says. "Get back up." Without a reason. Athena walks forward and offers him a hand. Not dramatically, just simply, "You don't need a reason," she says. "You need practice." And in that ridiculous chalk circle surrounded by gods in wrinkled togas, one of whom is humming a war ballad in falsetto, Ares takes it. Her hand, your breath catches, not because it's romantic, but because it's real. Historians still argue whether gods were ever meant to learn, but today, it feels like one did. The exercise ends, and no one declares victory, because that wasn't the point. The next session starts with a thunderclap, not metaphorical. Zeus arrives, the windows rattle, the torches flicker, and a few ancient scrolls burst into flames spontaneously. Dionysus immediately puts sunglasses on indoors, naturally, and mutters, "Ugh, this guy, you've never seen the gods look so collectively uncomfortable." Even Sybil's smile tightens like a harp string under tension. Zeus, father of gods, king of the sky, wears a robe that looks like it was woven from cloud drama and golden entitlement. His hair is windswept despite the room being sealed. His beard glows, and his voice rumbles like the prelude to divine taxes. "I heard there was therapy," he announces. "Figured I'd drop in, supervise, lend my wisdom." Ares immediately looks like someone just stepped on his last nerve. "You're not invited," he mutters. Zeus laughs, the kind of laugh that usually precedes someone getting turned into a goat. "I'm your father. Of course I'm invited. Family dynamics, right?" He winks, and thunder rolls behind his pupils. Sybil, ever the professional, gestures to an open seat. "We're exploring emotional communication today." "Perfect." Zeus booms. "I'm famously good at communication." Dionysus whispers to Apollo, "If by communication you mean yelling at clouds until they comply." Ares doesn't sit. Zeus finally turns to him. "My boy, let's talk. Just us." Ares snorts. "Now you want to talk?" "I've always been willing to talk," Zeus replies, arms wide, tone messianic. "You just didn't listen." "No, you talked. You never heard." Mainstream historical fact. Zeus fathered many children, divine and mortal. Ares was among the earliest. But unlike favored offspring like Athena, who sprang from his own head, or Apollo Golden Child, literally, Ares rarely received praise. In many myths, Zeus actively criticizes Ares, calling him a detested god in the Iliad, a rare moment of divine parental pettiness. "I fought every war you allowed," Ares says, "every city you condemned, every mortal mistake you shrugged off. I cleaned it up with blood." Zeus waves a hand. "That's the job." Ares's voice lowers. "No, that's what you decided my job would be." The room tenses. Even Athena looks up from her note-taking. Sibyl, tactful as ever, interjects. "Zeus, can you tell Ares what you saw in him before he became what he is now?" Zeus frowns, then crosses his arms. "Power, fire, something unshaped. You were raw, like a blade before the hammer. Did you love me?" Ares asks, and the room collapses into silence. Zeus blinks. He genuinely didn't expect that. "Well," Zeus says slowly, "I love all my children." Apollo snorts into his lyre. "No, you don't." Ares replies, "You love what they give you. Athena gave you pride. Hermes gave you cleverness. I gave you war. And all you gave back was distance." Fringe tidbit. In some lesser-known cultic texts, Ares is described not as Zeus's son, but as his shadow, a necessary counterweight to the king's shining authority. Some interpret this as metaphoric. Others believe it reflects a deeper unease with Zeus's treatment of unclean power, tolerated, but never embraced. Zeus stands now, glowing faintly with restrained ego. "I did what I had to do to keep Olympus safe." "No," Ares replies. "You did what you had to do to keep yourself comfortable. You can feel at the edge of something ancient, not violence, not thunder, truth. You were ashamed of me," Ares says. Zeus doesn't deny it. "I didn't understand you," he says finally, "and I feared what I couldn't control." There it is, the one line Ares has waited lifetimes to hear. "You feared me." Zeus nods once, and for the first time, Ares looks less like a weapon, more like a wound. Historians still argue whether Zeus was meant to represent order or hypocrisy. Some interpret his erratic punishments and unearned rewards as commentary on the injustice of divine authority. Others insist he was simply the personification of chaos and control until he wasn't. Sibyl gestures. "Zeus, can you give your son something? A sentence, a truth, something he's never heard from you." Zeus considers, then says, "I should have stood beside you, not just above you." Ares' hands twitch, not with rage, with restraint. "That would have been nice," he murmurs, "centuries ago." And then, after a beat, "But I'll take it now." Zeus sits. Ares does too, across from him, not below, and Sibyl finally smiles for real. "You're both heard," she says, "and maybe that's the start of peace." There's a strange hush after Zeus leaves. Not relief exactly, more like the ringing silence after a thunderclap, where even the stones seem to vibrate with memory. Ares doesn't speak for a while. He just sits, staring into the middle distance like he's trying to unsee every battle, every cold nod from his father, every moment someone mistook fear for respect. Then Sibyl quietly introduces the next item on the agenda. Today, she says, "We're exploring unexpressed emotion through symbolic destruction." Everyone stares at her. Dionysus leans forward, intrigued. "Does this involve throwing fruit?" Athena frowns. "What does that even mean?" "It means," Sibyl replies calmly, "you each wrote something last week, a truth you couldn't yet say out loud. You placed it in the urn of secrets." She gestures to a large clay pot in the center of the room, one that Ares had been suspicious of from the moment he arrived. "Oh no," Ares mutters. "You tricked me into journaling. Very sneaky." Apollo nods. "I respect it. We're going to destroy them." Sibyl continues, safely, symbolically, and maybe a little dramatically. "Now I'm listening," Dionysus says, conjuring a sparkler from his toga. The ritual begins. Sibyl holds the urn, opens it. Inside, the scrolls are sealed anonymous, but not unknowable. She offers them, one by one, to the writer who recognizes their own hand. No one claims the first few, a silent agreement. Sometimes, secrets stay buried. Then Ares stands. He walks up, pulls one from the pile, doesn't unroll it, just stares at it like it might uncoil into a snake. "What did you write?" Sybil asks. He doesn't answer. He just tears it. Once, twice, then drops it into the brazier by the window. It flares a quick burst of light and ash and it's gone. Mainstream historical fact. In many ancient Greek rituals, burning written words was a sacred act used to release curses, send prayers, or purge truths too dangerous to speak aloud. It wasn't about forgetting. It was about clearing space. That was mine. Ares says, and I meant every word, but I'm done carrying it. Athena steps up next. Her scroll burns slower, like even fire hesitated to challenge her logic. Apollo follows, humming tunelessly as he flicks his scroll in with flair. Mine was a poem. He says, it was bad. Dionysus throws in 2 scrolls. Then a handful of dried rose petals for drama. Hephaestus lingers the longest. His scroll turns to ember gently, like metal softening in a forge. Then Aphrodite steps forward. She doesn't say anything. She just stares at the fire for a long time before releasing the scroll. It catches midair and burns before even landing. Fringe myth. There is a lost Euboean folktale in which Aphrodite weeps not for a lost lover, but for herself, her many selves. It's said she threw her own reflection into a sea cave and it shattered into pearls. A myth that reminds us love doesn't always end with romance. Sometimes it ends with return. Finally, the urn is empty. Sybil nods. Now the real part. Ares grunts. That wasn't the real part. No, she says. Now we destroy something that isn't paper. She gestures to a large clay statue covered in a white cloth. The gods look wary. Ares steps closer, yanks the cloth off, and stares at himself. It's him, a statue version. Full armor, clenched fists, eyes narrowed in permanent fury. It's a perfect depiction of how the world sees him, rage given form. Go ahead, Sybil says softly. Destroy it. He stares at it a long time, then walks over and runs a finger along its stony jaw. Looks accurate, he mutters. But does it look like you? He thinks. Then, without warning, he punches it. The head flies off. Dionysus claps slowly. Therapy. Ares grabs a chunk of the shoulder and slams it into the floor. The torso cracks. He crushes the chest, the legs, the symbols carved into the base, until all that's left is a pile of rubble that used to be a war god. He stands over it, panting slightly. That, he says, was the version of me that never felt anything. He turns to the group. I'm done with him. The room is still. Then Athena nods once. Finally, Apollo whistles. 10 out of 10. Emotional carnage. No notes. Even Aphrodite smiles. Not smugly. Not with nostalgia. Just peacefully. Historians still argue whether gods could evolve or whether myth locked them into symbols. But tonight, Ares seems to have broken his own mold, and in doing so, reminded the rest of them that even rage can shed its armor. You look at Sybil. She doesn't say anything. She just writes one word in her notes. Becoming. There's a strange, quiet joy in the air the next day. Not the kind you sing about or carve into marble, but the weird, unspoken kind that settles when no one's actively trying to set the room on fire. Even Ares arrives early. No weapons. Just a small leather-bound notebook under his arm. You don't ask. You're learning. The circle forms naturally now, no scepter needed, no thunder required. Dionysus is sipping something fizzy and suspicious. Athena has stopped pretending she's only here for data collection. Even Apollo leaves his lyre in the hallway, as if the sound of silence might finally be useful. Sybil, ever the guide, looks around and smiles. How's everyone feeling today? For the first time, Ares answers first. I feel, he says slowly, like I'm not just here for damage control. That lands softly, then harder, because when the god of war starts leading the check-in, you know something seismic has shifted. Hephaestus gives a small nod. You've changed. Ares shrugs. Little, not a lot. Apollo smirks. I give it one minor insult before he reverts. Try me, Ares says with a warning grin. Your sandals clash with your emotional growth. Acceptable, Ares mutters. Dionysus raises a goblet. He's healing. He tolerated a fashion critique without issuing a blood feud. Mainstream historical fact. The Greeks saw balance not as stillness, but as constant adjustment. Harmony wasn't perfection, it was tension managed well. Perhaps that's what the gods were always meant to do. Teeter together, never quite fixed. but also never falling. Sybil raises an eyebrow. Today, we're doing something radical. Aries groans. Again, no drama, she says. No roleplay. No scrolls. Then what? Empathy. The silence that follows is louder than any lightning bolt. You'll each speak as someone else in the room. She explains. Try to embody how they feel. Think. Hurt. Hope. Athena crosses her arms. This sounds manipulative. Correct, Sybil replies. And very effective. Dionysus volunteers first. He stands, spreads his arms wide, and begins in a booming mockery of Ares' voice. I am angry all the time because no one invited me to brunch. And also I was raised inside an emotional volcano by two people who thought tenderness was a liability. The group laughs. Even Ares, not bad, he admits, needs more glowering. Athena tries next. Speaking as Dionysus, I'm not drunk, I'm just allergic to clarity. Also, please validate me faster. He gasps, rude and flawless. Then it's Ares' turn. He hesitates, looks at Sybil, who nods once. Then he says, in a calm, measured tone, I am Hephaestus. I see beauty in what others discard. I make things with my hands because no one taught me how to ask with my voice. And sometimes I hate that my fire builds instead of burns. The room still. Hephaestus doesn't speak for a long time, then simply says, thanks. You feel that one deep, like forged smoke clinging to your ribs. Athena goes last. She speaks as Aphrodite. I know what you think I am. Soft, dangerous, disposable. But I have held more broken hearts than all of you combined. And I have never dropped a single one. Aphrodite doesn't move. Then she reaches across the circle and touches Athena's hand, only briefly. But it's the kind of touch that doesn't need words. Fringe myth. In an obscure Arcadian tale, there is one line that stands out. Even the gods must sometimes pretend to be each other to remember who they are. Scholars think it was a metaphor for empathy, or maybe an early form of theater, or maybe truth spoken through costume. Sybil gestures to Ares. Last one. She says, you as someone else. Ares frowns, thinks, then straightens, softens his face, and says, I am me. That's it. Just that. The most terrifying role he could try. Historians still argue whether gods had inner lives or were just projections of cultural need. But today, you believe they do? Because you just watched one try to step inside himself and survive it. Dionysus raises his goblet to pretending until it stops being pretend. Apollo murmurs, to knowing each other, even when we'd rather not. Aphrodite simply says, to being seen. And Ares, he doesn't toast, he just writes something down. In that notebook, quietly, deliberately, like maybe he's not done figuring out what kind of god he actually wants to be. The storm breaks during the night. Not metaphorically, an actual divine thunderstorm. You wake to the sound of lightning cleaving clouds like old parchment, thunder rattling the rafters of Mount Olympus, and the faint sense that something celestial is off script. By the time you reach the therapy chamber, it's half flooded. The scroll cabinet has toppled, and Cybele is calmly placing towels beneath a dripping marble bust of Poseidon, who is not part of this group and probably did not appreciate the subtle gesture. Then you notice Ares. He's sitting cross-legged on the wet floor, barefoot, shirtless, soaked to the bone, laughing, like actually laughing. Apollo's already there, playing gentle chords on a small lyre. Unfazed by the chaos, Dionysus is curled up in a pile of damp cushions, sipping something warm and vaguely purple. Athena is trying to control the leak using geometric ratios and possibly divine algebra. It's not working. What happened? You ask? Blinking. He cried. Sybil says softly. You stare at her, then at Ares, who meets your eyes and says, not embarrassed at all. Apparently, when gods cry, it causes weather. Mainstream historical fact. The ancient Greeks did attribute natural phenomena to divine emotion. Storms were often linked to Zeus's anger or Poseidon's mood swings. But a few rare folk myths, usually suppressed or reinterpreted, spoke of Ares causing sudden rain or tremors when overwhelmed with grief. Most temples ignored those stories. They weren't useful. What brought it on? Athena asks, not unkindly. Ares gestures around him. All of it. The sessions, the scrolls, the helmet sculpture, Hephaestus not hating me, you calling me a wound with legs, Aphrodite not walking out. Zeus actually showing up, me not punching anything. Pick one. There's a long pause. Then Hephaestus mutters, I'd cry too if someone said I had sandals that clashed. Dionysus raises his cup. To catharsis. No more toasts, Athena says firmly. Agreed. Apollo adds, we're running out of adjectives. Ares leans back, arms behind him, face turned to the dripping ceiling. I forgot I could feel this much without fighting something. That, Sibyl says, is exactly why we're doing this next part. She pulls out a flat wooden board covered in small tokens, each carved with different symbols: a heart, a sword, a tree, a mirror, a cracked vase, a closed day. Pick one. She tells the group, and explain why. They each go around. Athena takes the mirror. Because sometimes I don't recognize myself when I'm not calculating. Dionysus takes the cracked vase. Because I am a cracked vase. And also, because wine. Apollo chooses the tree. Growth. And also I've been working on my metaphor game. Hephaestus, unsurprisingly, chooses the hammer-shaped one. Because repair isn't weakness. Aphrodite holds the closed eye. Because I want to stop watching myself through other people's desires. Then all eyes turn to Ares. He takes the heart. Everyone blinks. Apollo fake coughs. Symbolism overload. Sibyl smiles. Why that one? Ares runs a thumb over the carving. Because I've been acting like I don't have one. Fringe myth. In one obscure Thracian ritual now lost save for a single line etched into a cave wall, priests of Ares would offer not blood, but rose petals. The idea that every warrior bleeds, but only the brave admit they hurt. Most scholars dismiss the fragment. Too soft, too human, too inconvenient. You know, Ares says, I used to think I was just a storm in a god's body. He looks at the shattered bust of Poseidon. Turns out, I'm more of a monsoon with journaling potential. Dionysus raises both hands. Can we get that on a t-shirt? Athena finally laughs. Just once. Short, sharp, but it's there. Sibyl writes something in her notes, but you know she's smiling under it. The session continues in quiet conversation. No exercises, no armor, just gods talking. Ares listens more than he speaks now. You can tell it's not easy. Every pause feels like a battle he wins silently. Every word he chooses is deliberate, like he's reforging the very weapon he used to be. Historians still argue whether Ares was ever meant to survive time. He wasn't useful in peace. He didn't teach or heal, but maybe that's exactly why he matters. Because rage that chooses reflection, that's not destruction, that's rebirth. And today, in the dripping heart of Olympus, surrounded by soggy divinity and scattered metaphors, Ares finally looks like a god not at war, but becoming whole. The final session comes quietly. No thunder, no scrolls, no weapons or ritualized arguments. Just morning light spilling softly through the columns, painting golden pools across the marble floor like forgiveness warmed by time. Sibyl doesn't call the circle to order. The gods seat themselves without being asked. Ares arrives last, but this time he's smiling. A small, reluctant, slightly confused smile, like someone still getting used to muscles that weren't designed for softness. He carries nothing but his journal, the same one you've seen him scribbling in since that first chaotic session. The one that began with him threatening a tapestry and ended with a group of immortals trading trauma like bartering olives at a market. Final reflections, Sibyl says, gently, if you're ready. The gods look around, then nod in quiet agreement. Athena begins. I came here to observe, to assess and categorize. I leave, uncertain. Which, for me, is progress. Dionysus raises an imaginary glass. I came here because someone promised wine. But I leave slightly less emotionally constipated, and that's worth more than most wine. Hephaestus taps his cane against the floor. I never expected to hear anyone say what Ares said, especially Ares. But I'm glad I lived long enough to see a war god admit fragility isn't failure. Aphrodite doesn't stand. She simply folds her hands over her lap and says, I came expecting confessions. I leave with clarity, and that's something I didn't know I needed. Apollo, ever the dramatist, stands and delivers his line like a final lyric. Therapy, where even golden boys learn they're not the sun, just its reflection on water. Then all eyes shift to Ares. He exhales, slow and steady, and stands. I came here angry, he says. Everyone chuckles. Even he does. I thought this would be a waste of time. that I'd be asked to perform pain or suppress it. I didn't realize I'd be allowed to understand it. He holds up the journal. I wrote things, not just about war, about before war, about what I remember, what I forgot, and who I might become without all this. He gestures to himself. Metal, mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek warriors believed that removing one's armor in front of another was an act of immense trust. In some cases, it was reserved only for lovers or brothers in arms. Today, Ares doesn't wear a breastplate, just a tunic, slightly wrinkled, with the sleeves rolled up like he's preparing to build something. I'm not fixed. He continues. Gods don't get fixed, but I'm quieter now. Inside, like the part of me that only knew how to fight, learned how to pause. He looks around the circle. You're all still insufferable. Dionysus grins. But, Ares adds, I think I'd miss you now. That hits harder than any spear. Cybele stands last. You've all done the one thing Olympus thought was impossible. She says, you've changed. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to matter. There's no ceremony, no divine fanfare. Just quiet nods, a few smiles. Apollo might be misty-eyed, but insists it's pollen season. Then Cybele steps forward and hands Ares something, a single page, folded, blank. For the next thing you're not ready to say yet, she tells him. He stares at it, then tucks it into his journal. Fringe myth, a lost verse from an early hymn to Ares, ends not in triumph or rage, but with a plea. Let the fire rest when the night is kind. Some believe it was sung to soothe returning soldiers. Others think it was never meant for mortals at all. And with that, the circle breaks, but not the bond, not the growth, not the silence between storms. You stay behind a little longer. The chamber is empty now, sun spilling quietly across stone once slick with the tears of gods. The brazier is cold, the urn is sealed. The statue fragments of old rage lie untouched in the corner like relics from a life no longer worn. And Ares, he walks down the mountain slowly, not charging, not storming, just walking, one foot, then the other, the same god, but quieter now, gentler in ways no hymn ever promised him he could be. A warm wind rises, rustling olive branches far below. Somewhere in the valley, mortal voices sing something soft, a love song, maybe, or just the sound of life moving on without fire. You sit down where the circle once stood. Let the calm fill your chest. Let the memory of storm gods sharing secrets rock you gently towards sleep. Because this was never really about mythology. It was about anger that became honesty, chaos that learned to breathe, and a war god tired, real healing. Who finally said what none of us knew we needed to hear. I feel, so if your eyes are heavy now, let them close. Let the thunder rest. Let the armor fall. You've made it through Olympus's strangest, softest storm. And you're still here, whole, still becoming, still you. Good night, traveler. And may your battles be few and your journals full.